Hey, and welcome to this week's coaching video for those of you who are going to be facilitating and hosting adult small groups through Daysprings Ministry. If you're going to be hosting that small group the week of October the 19th, then this video is designed to help you get ready to do that. So grab the Going Deeper guide that you've been sent, the one that you and your group are going to use as part of your group time, and I'm going to walk through it with you, and we're just going to make some observations. Maybe you can write some things down that might help you as you facilitate your small group. So go ahead and grab that. As you do, let me give you an overview of what this small group discussion is going to be about and kind of where you're trying to lead this discussion. This handout, as always, it's going to flow in connection with the Sunday sermon. And the Sunday sermon is going to be about the tabernacle that God instructed the Israelites to build in the Old Testament. As part of that construction, God had told the people, build this tabernacle so that I can be among you now. So God was coming near to the people, which was a paradigm shift for them, whereas before God had been with Moses sort of up on the mountain. Now he said, I'm going to be with my people. I'm going to move about with them as they move to the promised land. Well, what this small group discussion is going to focus on is that element of God being among us and God being near us. But where we're going to head is the New Testament reality that God is not just among us, kind of out and about, that now He's actually in us, which is a beautiful truth that the New Testament teaches. And if you kind of want to read a little more about that in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, there are some good things said about the Spirit dwelling in us. Now we are God's tabernacle, or we are God's temple, the place where He rests, the place where He dwells. So this discussion is going to focus on the reality that the Spirit of God now is in us, and what we're going to try and basically get at in this is, since He is in us, what should we notice about ourselves, or what should we be doing? In other words, because God's Spirit dwells inside of me, what should be a practical reality of that? And what we're going to focus on, because there are a lot of answers that go with that question, the one that we're going to focus on is the reality that since God now indwells us, we are to be His witnesses. So that's what this whole discussion is going to focus on. You're going to talk about that, talk about what it means, and even do a little bit of practice or witness preparation at the end of this discussion, all right? So let's look at the details. Discussion point number 1, as always, is going to point you back to a text that we study in church and have you and your group sort of rehash that and talk about what you learned. As a group facilitator, be sure to take some good notes Sunday so that you can lead out in this portion. And as always, I'll say this every time, sometimes a group discussion doesn't get any further than discussion point number 1. And if that happens, it's absolutely okay. If the discussion is meaningful and it's taking you guys somewhere, let that happen. And this may be one of those weeks where that happens because the sermon content is going to be full. I mean, it's a full plate of content. You may take a lot of notes. You and your group may spend a lot of time just kind of reworking what you heard Sunday. But again, if that's meaningful, let it happen. And so that's one of those, all right? If not, you're going to move on into the rest of your discussion time. And look at the handout. Discussion point number 2 is kind of an icebreaker. Look at it. It says, who's the most famous person you ever met? And so at that point, your group can kind of share who it may be. And you may end up with some pretty funny dialogue here. You may have somebody in your group who's met somebody really, really famous. It may be that nobody in your group has ever met anybody outside of like an Alabama or Auburn football player or something, but that may be the most famous person you ever met. But let people say who's the most famous person they ever met. And then it asks, did you try and get a photograph or an autograph or something like that? If so, here's the question at the end of that. It looks kind of like an odd question, but look at the question at the very end. Did you get a photograph? Did you get an autograph? Did you tell anybody that you met these people? And here's the question. Why? Why did you tell them? I mean, it's kind of a weird question, but I want you to include that question in the discussion. Who's the most famous person you ever met? How did you respond? And why? The why of it is because for some reason we just get excited when we meet people of fame, and probably it's because we know it's a rare occurrence. That's probably why we actually get excited. And that leads you to discussion point number 3 on your handout. Look at it. It's not one of these ones that you discuss. It's just one that you're going to read or call upon someone to read. It says, when we are near, quote unquote, important people, we tend to get excited because we realize it's a rare occasion. And here's the segue into our Bible dialogue now. It says, as such, the prospect of being near God should really energize us, especially when we consider that He's not just near us, but He's in us and always. So think about it. When we get around famous people or important people, we get pretty excited, and we'll even take pictures and autographs and tell people about it. If that's the way we react with mere humans, who we know are mere humans, how much more excited and energized should we be at the prospect that the creator of the universe is not just around us and in our midst, but actually with us, in us, all the time. It should be pretty exciting. And so let's not take that for granted. Now, that moves you into the reading that's going to kind of get you into all of this. Look at discussion point number 4. It says, read Jesus' last words on earth in Acts chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. And obviously these aren't his last words because he's not gone, didn't die, but it's the last words he said before he left the earth. And let me read those to you. Acts 1, verses 5 through 8. Jesus said, for John baptized with water, but in a few days you're going to be baptized with the Holy Spirit. So when they met together, they all asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said to them, it's not for you to know the times or the dates that the Father has set by his own authority. Then verse 8, which is familiar. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Now, a pretty familiar passage, but the reason we started in verse 5 and ended in verse 8 is because Jesus puts an emphasis on the presence of the Spirit. He says, just as John submerged you in water, you're about to be submerged in the Spirit of God. And then they ask him some questions. He says, what's important is that the Spirit is coming to be with you and in you. And when he does, you're going to be my witnesses all over the world. Now, there are a lot of details here that we could focus on. The geographical intentionality of what Jesus focuses on, sort of the way the disciples still aren't getting it, even after 3 years and a crucifixion and resurrection. They're still asking questions about Israel being important. We could focus on all of that, but what we're going to focus on in your discussion is the part where Jesus said, you're going to be my witnesses. That's what we're going to focus on. Now, that moves you into discussion point number 5. You'll see how the witness part of this is going to be focused on. And by the way, discussion point number 4, you're just reading it, all right? It's not necessarily a commentary question. You don't have to take the lead on that other than have somebody read it. Once it's read, now you move into discussion point number 5, where you're asking the question, what exactly is a witness and what does a witness do? And you'll notice that your discussion guide is leading you away from religious contexts. This isn't you're not looking for a Sunday school answer here. Oh, well, here's what a witness is. In normal society, outside of religious contexts, what is a witness and what does a witness do? So, when I think of that question, outside of sort of church or religious connotations, what is a witness, what does a witness do? I think of two really things. I think of a courtroom setting where a witness is called, or I think of like the scene of a crime or a scene of an accident where someone will probably end up in a courtroom. But, those two instances are what I think of. That's what a witness is. It's someone who saw something or experienced something firsthand and is called upon to talk about that. So really what you're trying to do in discussion point number 5 is talk about what the word witness means in normal terminology, okay? Because sometimes when we get in church settings and when we get in small group settings, all of a sudden we start speaking in this real, flowery, heavenly kind of a language. We're talking regular stuff here, okay? What is a witness? What does a witness do? And again, when I think about it, that whole concept of a first-hand experience or some sort of expertise in a certain field, bring that up if no one else does in your group. A witness is somebody who has experience or expertise, probably both. That's what a witness is. Now that leads you into the next discussion point. Look at it, verse number 6, discussion point number 6. It says, so, now that you've talked about what a witness is, if Jesus said we are witnesses of him, what exactly does that mean? And again, focus on the first-hand experience of it all. We are people who have had a first-hand experience with Jesus Christ. Now he's saying to us we are to testify to that, or to talk about that, or make that known. That's what a witness is. Now, in a Jesus context, all right? Now, there's a follow-up statement here that's pretty cool. Look at this. It says the Greek word for witness is marturos. And just in case you've kind of forgotten why that matters, when we talk about Greek or Hebrew or those sort of things, Acts was originally written in Greek. And so what Jesus said here, it was recorded in the Greek language, so it's translated for us into English. So when Jesus said this, he said, you are to be my marturos, all right? The Spirit's going to come upon you, you're going to be my marturos. The word marturos is where we get our word martyr. So the word witness, there's a connection there with the concept of being a martyr. So look at this. It says the Greek word for witness is marturos, from which we get the word martyr. How does that add to our understanding of what it means to be a witness? Now think about that. If witnessing is somehow, it's akin to this whole concept of martyrdom, what does that tell us is involved in the process of being a witness? What it tells me is that if I'm going to be a witness, something has to die. Now, in some instances, in some rare instances, in certain parts of the world, and we certainly see this happening today, being a witness for Jesus means literally becoming a martyr. Now, obviously, that's not always the case, but there is some form of martyrdom that takes place when we witness in the sense that something has to die. So bring that up to your group. That's kind of the answer to that question. What does understanding that witness means marturos, what does that add to our understanding of what it means to be a witness for Jesus? Well, what it means is something has to die. And what you might explore with your group at this point, what is it that's going to possibly have to die other than my physical life? What is it that may have to die if I'm going to be what Jesus has commanded me to be? Think about that. There are a lot of possible answers. My pride may have to die. Some sort of opportunity may have to die because I may know that, hey, once I put this Jesus thing on the table, I might not be the one that gets invited to the thing or promoted in the job. I may lose something here by coming forward as a witness of Jesus. So you can see that being a witness, there is a cost to it. And the very word witness, knowing that it comes from this marturos word, we know that being a witness comes with a cost and a price, that something has to die in some way. And in some instances, being a witness, and maybe you've even experienced this, sometimes creates relational death. There are people who cut us off when we decide that we want to present Jesus to them and make that known and bring it to their attention. So, all of these things, keep it in mind. Now, that's all of that. Now you move on to discussion point number 7. It says, here's the bottom line, discussion point number 7. So again, this is one of those things that you're probably just going to read or have someone read. No need to really comment on it. This is kind of summing up everything that you've talked about up to this point. It says, were it not for the fact that the Spirit is in us, we couldn't be who we were made to be, because we were made to be witnesses of Jesus. And that's a pretty loaded statement, actually, if you want to let people just digest it. But when you think about it, we were made to be witnesses of Jesus. Were it not for the Spirit of God living in us, we could not be who we were made to be. That's a pretty big statement. And again, that's why the Spirit's presence inside of us should be a really, really big deal. Because the Spirit in us, now, when we meet somebody famous, it's exciting. But their presence around us doesn't give us a purpose in life. That's what the Spirit does. The Spirit gives us an actual purpose, an ability to fulfill our purpose in this life. So that's really where you've gone in that part of the discussion. Now you move on to a second wave, which is discussion points 8 and 9. Look at number 8. It says in the book of Acts, we read about people who became filled with God's Spirit, because that's what we've been talking about. Read the following passages and talk about what they all shared in common as a result of being filled with God's Spirit. And this is going to be an easy connection, because here's what you're going to notice. Every time someone was filled with the Spirit, they started to talk about Jesus. I mean, that's pretty much what you're going to notice. And you'll see it happen in a variety of ways. You've got it happening in Acts chapter 2. People are doing it by speaking in tongues. And don't let that bog your group down if people get confused by that, because I know that sometimes the speaking in tongues creates confusion. The whole point there is people translated it, and what they were talking about was the gospel. Acts 4, Acts 31, Acts 4:31, Acts 13. Every single time it says there's a connection. The Spirit filled people, they begin to witness unto Jesus. And it happens in a variety of ways. There's bold, there's encouragement, but there's a correlation that when the Spirit is inside of us, we ought to be witnesses, and He empowers us to do so. You'll finish with discussion point number 9. Check this out. If you ask someone what is the gospel, how would you explain it to them? Ask that question and stop, because what you're doing at this point, discussion point number 9 is witness training. It's witness practice, because you're going to do two things. Number one, you're giving people a chance to articulate what even is the gospel. Let everyone in the group try and do that. What is the gospel? If somebody asks you, how do you explain it? How do you verbalize it? Number two, it says share with each other some Bible verses you found to be helpful when attempting to share the gospel. So think about what you're doing right here in discussion point number 9. We've been told that we are to be witnesses of Jesus. Now as a group, you're saying, well, here's how I word it. And then you're helping each other saying, when I try and word it, here are some Bible verses that really help me to make my point. You're coaching each other and training each other on how to be verbal witnesses. All right, so let your group talk about these Bible verses that are helpful. I know in my own life, I was kind of taught this Roman road, so to speak, because a bunch of verses that come out of the book of Romans that help me kind of lay out the gospel itself. Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 5:8, Romans 10:13. I mean, all of sin, there's a penalty for sin. Jesus laid down His life for us and paid for our sin. Now if we call upon His name, we will be saved. Those are the verses that really help me, as well as John 3:16, which is one that people actually know about. So let your group talk about the verses that are helpful, but what you've done in this lesson is you've been reminded of the fact that God isn't just with us, He's in us. And when He is in us, He gives us the power to be who Jesus commanded us to be, which is His witnesses. And then you're finishing your time by saying, how do you witness? Or how can we witness? How can we learn to witness? And that's what you're doing in the small group time, all right? So, hope you have a good time with that. I hope it's meaningful and productive for your small group. Thanks for listening in. We'll see you Sunday.